Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast.
The system cannot see itself. A hospital introduces a scheduling system to reduce missed appointments. The logic is reasonable. Patients who have previously failed to attend are assigned a higher risk score. Those judged most likely to miss an appointment receive fewer choices, shorter confirmation windows, and in some cases, a lower priority for scarce specialist time. The system works, missed appointments fall. Then something else begins to happen. The people most likely to be classified as unreliable are often those whose lives are least able to absorb another demand. Shift workers, carers, people moving between temporary addresses, people whose phones run out of credit, people whose illnesses make planning difficult. Restricted choices make attendance harder. A missed confirmation becomes a cancelled appointment. The cancellation becomes another mark in the record. The record returns as evidence that the original judgment was correct. Nothing in the system is obviously irrational. Each decision can be defended. Each variable has a history. Each outcome can be measured. And yet the system is slowly teaching reality to resemble its model. This is where systems thinking becomes necessary and where it becomes dangerous. Its most important claim is not that everything is connected. That phrase is too easy. A conspiracy theory also connects everything. The harder claim is that causes do not always remain where they begin. They travel through institutions, incentives, delays, expectations, and acts of adaptation. An intervention changes the conditions in which its own results will later be interpreted. The appointment system is not simply processing patients. Patients are learning how the system sees them. Staff are learning which cases require less discretion. Managers are learning which numbers demonstrate success. The model becomes part of the environment it claims merely to describe. Once this happens, the distinction between observation and intervention begins to fail. We are accustomed to thinking of knowledge as a clearer view of something already there. We imagine a world on one side and a representation of it on the other. The representation may be accurate or inaccurate, detailed or crude, but it remains a picture. In many human systems, however, the picture enters the scene. A credit score changes the price of credit. A school ranking changes where families move. A productivity measure changes how work is performed. A crime map changes where police are sent, which changes what offences are detected, which changes the next map. A recommendation system alters what people encounter and then records their altered behaviour as evidence of preference. The map acquires hands. This does not make measurement impossible or modelling corrupt. It means that a model of a human system cannot be judged only by whether it predicts. We must also ask what its predictions permit, discourage, conceal, and bring into being. Systems thinking emerged from the recognition that many forms of behaviour cannot be explained by inspecting components separately. A traffic jam is not located inside any one car. Inflation is not contained in a single price. Trust does not exist inside one person. Organisational silence is not merely the sum of employees choosing not to speak. These are patterns sustained through relationship. A traffic jam forms because drivers respond to one another with tiny delays. Trust develops because expectations are repeatedly met, interpreted, and revised. Silence spreads because each person reads the caution of others as information about what can safely be said. The pattern is real, but it is not an additional object hovering above the parts. It exists through their coordination. This is the great strength of systems thinking. It allows explanation to move away from isolated blame. When a service repeatedly fails, it is tempting to search for the careless employee. When a family repeats the same conflict, it is tempting to identify the difficult person. When a market produces exploitation, it is tempting to divide the participants into the greedy and the innocent. Sometimes individual responsibility is exactly what matters, but repeated outcomes often survive the replacement of individuals. New people enter and begin producing the old behaviour. Something's being carried by the arrangement. The arrangement may distribute information badly. It may reward delay, punish candour, or make locally rational actions collectively destructive. It may contain a reinforcing loop in which each attempt to solve the problem intensifies it. It may depend on a resource no one has been assigned to protect. It may produce an outcome that almost nobody wants because each participant is responding reasonably to the choices immediately available. Systems thinking asks us to locate responsibility without pretending that responsibility must be simple. That is already difficult. It becomes harder when the language of systems migrates from understanding into control. The attraction is obvious. If an institution can identify the variables, map the dependencies, and observe the feedback, perhaps it can move beyond the waste and confusion of ordinary judgment. Perhaps policy can become engineering. Perhaps disagreement can be translated into optimization. Perhaps enough data will reveal the setting at which the whole system works. This fantasy does not require bad intentions. It often appears as impatience with preventable suffering. A government wants benefits to reach the right people. A hospital wants beds used efficiently. A school wants to identify children at risk. A company wants to detect fraud. A city wants traffic to move. Each goal is defensible. Each invites a model. Each model requires a boundary, a target, and a definition of success. The danger begins when those decisions disappear inside the machinery. No model discovers its own purpose. Someone decides what counts as failure. Someone chooses the time horizon. Someone determines which costs belong inside the calculation and which can be treated as external. Someone decides whether an incorrect denial is more serious than an incorrect approval, whether efficiency matters more than dignity, whether consistency is preferable to discretion. These are not technical residues waiting to be eliminated. They are political and ethical decisions in technical form. A system can be exquisitely calibrated and still be calibrated to the wrong thing. This is one reason institutions become attached to measures that everyone privately knows are inadequate. The measure creates a shared surface. It allows decisions to be compared, defended, and audited. Once budgets, promotions, and reputations become attached to it, the measure no longer reports the work. It reorganizes the work. Teachers teach toward the test. Police record what the target recognizes. Call centers shorten conversations. Hospitals discharge patients into conditions that will return them. The measure improves while the reality thins around it. From inside the dashboard, this can look like progress. The problem is sometimes described as reductionism, but that word is not enough. All thought reduces. To notice one thing is to leave another temporarily in shadow. A map containing every stone, hesitation, memory, and possibility would be unusable. The question is not whether we simplify. The question is whether the simplification remains answerable to what it excludes. A responsible model knows that it is partial. An irresponsible model acquires authority faster than it acquires doubt. Systems thinking should make this easier to understand because it draws attention to feedback, second-order effects, and the position of the observer. Yet it can reproduce the very blindness it was meant to overcome. The isolated object is replaced by the complete network. The simple cause is replaced by the comprehensive diagram. The world is reconnected, but it is still imagined as something that can be viewed from nowhere. The fantasy of mastery survives at a higher level. This is the central contradiction. Systems thinking teaches that the observer belongs to the system, but its diagrams often place the observer outside the page. The analyst draws the boundary. The institution funds the analysis. The categories reflect an administrative history. The people being represented encounter the consequences. They comply, resist, perform, conceal, and reinterpret. Their responses become new inputs. The system changes because it has been observed, and the observer changes because the system has responded. Artificial intelligence intensifies this condition because it can detect associations across volumes of information that no person could inspect directly. That capacity is real. It can reveal patterns hidden by scale, identify interactions that linear reasoning misses, and make some forms of prevention possible. But scale produces a peculiar authority. When no individual can reconstruct the whole judgment, the output can begin to feel less like an argument and more like an event. The system has seen something. The score exists. The classification arrives already surrounded by the prestige of complexity. The person subjected to it may be required to explain themselves to a process that cannot explain itself in return. This is not merely a problem of transparency. A perfectly transparent model can still impose a category that distorts the life placed inside it. Explanation matters, but contestability matters more. The central question is not only whether we can see how a decision was made, it is whether the person affected can alter the account of reality on which the decision depends. A mature system must remain corrigible from below. That requirement changes how we understand efficiency. Redundancy, discretion, local judgment and appeal can look like friction. They slow decisions and create variation. They can also be the means by which reality re-enters a system after the categories have failed. The employee who notices that a form does not fit the situation is not necessarily undermining consistency. The clinician who distrusts a reassuring score is not necessarily rejecting evidence. The citizen who refuses the available categories is not noise. Sometimes friction is information. A resilient institution therefore needs more than accurate models. It needs protected routes through which the model can be contradicted. It needs people authorized to recognize exceptions, records capable of preserving uncertainty, and decisions that can be reversed before their consequences harden into biography. This is difficult because institutions prefer errors that are legible to uncertainties that are alive. A mistaken decision produced by an approved process is easier to defend than a humane exception that cannot be standardized. Procedure distributes accountability until no one appears to have chosen the outcome. The system did it, but systems do not absolve responsibility, they relocate it. Responsibility belongs partly to the person who acts, partly to the rules that shaped the available action, partly to the institution that maintained those rules, and partly to the political order that decided which harms were tolerable. This distribution does not make responsibility disappear. It makes moral judgment more demanding. We must learn to hold two truths at once. People act within systems, and systems continue through people. Too much emphasis on individual choice turns structural suffering into personal failure. Too much emphasis on structure turns human beings into passive conduits. The difficulty is not choosing between agency and system. It is understanding how each enters the other. Freedom becomes more complicated under this view. Freedom is often imagined as the absence of constraint, as though a person becomes free by escaping systems altogether. But language, care, law, infrastructure, memory and trust are not optional surroundings. They are conditions through which a life becomes possible. We do not stand outside interdependence and decide whether to enter. The opposite mistake is to treat interdependence as permission for unlimited management. Because people depend on one another, the argument goes, the whole may organize the parts for their collective good. But a system that cannot be refused is not made humane by being interconnected. A free society must preserve the capacity of those within it to interrupt its descriptions. People need room to dissent, withdraw, reinterpret, appeal, and begin again. They need institutions that can be changed by the lives passing through them. This is not disorder. It is a higher form of responsiveness. The same principle applies beyond politics. An ecosystem is not healthy because it remains unchanged. A family is not healthy because conflict disappears. An organization is not healthy because every process is followed. Stability can be a sign of resilience, but it can also be the stillness of a system that's eliminated every signal it does not know how to receive. The question is not whether a system maintains order. The question is what kinds of disturbance it can learn from. This is why the language of stewardship is more useful than the language of control. Stewardship does not mean passivity, reverence, or a refusal to intervene. It means acting without claiming possession of the whole. It means accepting that every intervention enters a field of consequences wider than its intention. Stewardship preserves reversibility where certainty is low. It values diversity because uniform systems can fail uniformly. It keeps memory of discarded knowledge because conditions change. It distinguishes a temporary improvement in a metric from a durable improvement in the life the metric represents. Above all, it treats surprise as more than error. A system that surprises us may be revealing a hidden dependency, an excluded population, a delayed consequence, or a purpose that was never shared. Surprise is the moment reality exceeds the account we made of it. The instinct of control is to close that gap quickly. The discipline of stewardship is to remain there long enough to learn. This is the deeper revolution in systems thinking. It is not the discovery of universal harmony. Systems can exploit, exclude, and destroy with extraordinary coherence. Nor is it the belief that wholes are wiser than parts. A crowd can become cruel. A market can coordinate deprivation. A bureaucracy can distribute harm so evenly that no individual action appears decisive. The revolution is the collapse of innocence about position. There is no untouched place from which we classify the world. Our descriptions alter attention. Our measures reorganize conduct. Our interventions return through the systems they enter. The attempt to control becomes one of the causes that must itself be understood. Knowledge does not lose its power when it recognizes this. It loses its alibi. The hospital scheduling system may still be necessary. Risk models may still improve care, but the system should not be allowed to convert the difficulties it produces into evidence against the people who experience them. It must be able to discover that its success is becoming someone else's trap. That discovery will not arrive automatically from more data. It will arrive when a person, an exception, a contradiction, or a refusal is still permitted to count as knowledge. The system cannot see itself from outside. There is no outside from which to look.
The Deeper Thinking podcast explores new philosophical ground by examining our rapidly evolving digital and political landscape. Each episode is built through rigorous ethical and research-based protocols. I use a digital narrator to help manage the workload. My goal is to invite fresh perspectives, thoughtful curiosity, and deeper understanding. Every episode takes considerable time and reflection to produce. Throughout the process, I'm guided by a strong moral core. If you enjoy my work, please consider letting me and others know. A review or rating on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or your preferred platform makes an enormous difference. Your support helps the podcast reach new listeners, fosters meaningful discussion, and keeps this project alive. Until next time.